Good morning. My name is Shirley Vargas, School Transformation Officer and Administrator for School and District Support at the NDE. I'm joined by my colleague, Lane Carr, who is the Administrator for Policy and Strategic Initiatives. And we're just going to jump right in. We have a couple of objectives. And I do want to set the stage in that we have 4 sessions going on today and tomorrow, all being recorded on materials we made available after the recording is posted onto our AQuEST webpage, with the intent of kind of reintroducing folks to AQuEST, our accountability system, how they both go hand in hand, and how we are striving for coherence across other initiatives that we have in our department. And all in the name of supporting student achievement, student growth, healthy communities, healthy learning environments, all of these things coming together. So today's session will really focus on an introduction to AQuEST and really making sure that we understand what the framework is, right? What are the guiding principles? What are the tenets? What are the domains? What are these languages? What does this language mean? Also then kind of digging in a little bit, getting our feet wet related to the accountability system. What are the indicators that are included in that system? And ultimately providing some high level updates related to federal and accountability changes for this upcoming school year, or currently this school year, right? Welcome back. Thank you all for taking your time, to join us for a little bit today. And for those of us who'll be joining later, thank you for tuning in after. I will quickly say that this also may sound a little bit redundant if you've been part of some conversations with us throughout the summer and even at the end of the previous school year. So if you were like, I've heard this already, great, then your thinking hasn't changed, or, things are still consistent. Or if something is new to you, also be open to this learning, or, thinking about how this might be applicable to your current situation right now as of today, right? So we're going to jump right in. One last comment. Lane is managing the chat and anyone who may be entering the Zoom room, and I'm handling the slides, but we'll switch back and forth so you'll hear both of our voices. So our AQuEST framework. Here we have a timeline of all of the things related to accountability, assessment, and content area standards that have taken place in our state. And it's important to understand the historical context, because if we're thinking about this in terms of how long we've been in the game around accountability and also the state's role in supporting schools and improving academic outcomes for underperforming schools, we haven't actually been doing that work for a super long time. So we want to make sure that we provide you all some historical context related to the role that federal law, as well as the state legislature, has played in positioning state education agencies, specifically ours, in the role of setting content area standards, right? And ensuring that we have statewide assessments that we're able to ensure participation, right? And ensure outcomes of all students, right? Students with disabilities, English learners, students in poverty, and students across all races. And ultimately, this is all grounded on ample stakeholder feedback, right? So while we've been thrusted by federal and state law, we also have been cognizant of what it means to integrate voices of district, school, ESU staff, community partners, and we just want to put that there forth. So Lane, do you want to take us through this next portion here?
You bet. Good morning, everybody. The only thing that I would add here is just, it does seem, as Shirley mentioned, like there has been a lot of change over the last, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years in some cases. And there has been. And a lot of that has been as a result of that stakeholder engagement, but a significant amount has been brought upon by the local legislature as well as the federal government. So I would love to just spend, I put this in the chat, the timeline here. It's on our AQuEST website as well in the resources section. I would love to just give 30 seconds for you all to enter something in the chat from this timeline that surprised you or was one fact that you weren't aware of. something that maybe caught your attention. I'm going to mute and then allow some space for the chat. And then I will also read out some of those items so that those who are listening in after this session can also hear it. So let's just take some time, look through, and feel free to enter into the chat something new. Yeah, thank you for the first go here. Yeah, so we had a respondent say, the timeline reflects the NDE's response to Nebraska law. Thank you for sharing that. Keep them coming. Take 2 more responses. Feel free to pop those in to the chat. Yeah, thank you. 2 more responses here include there's a 7-year gap from 2000 to 2007 when we did STARS. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And that should probably be in there because, I do see, I guess, that it is there, but that is an interesting sort of chunk of time that was also at the same time as No Child Left Behind. So thank you for that. And then stakeholder input around 2014 and then really noted throughout the rest of the time as well. Certainly there could be a lot more on here, and I've been reflecting on that responsive sort of question or comment here too about how we could maybe anticipate some of the changes. So thanks for sharing those. Yeah, let's keep going. This is really great. Feel free to add more to the chat. So I did want to just make sure too that folks knew that the AQuESTT framework that we're going to talk about here in just a moment comes from someplace. And that is our state board. So in its early adoption in 2014 and 15, the state board put out policy reference and position statement S2, which is about AQuESTT. And that was really where they set out the tenants, the domains, and sort of that language and vision around AQuESTT. It was revised in 2019 and included some key language change, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. But it also said, we, the board, want this position statement to be more encompassing than just accountability. We really want AQuESTT to be about approval, accreditation, and accountability. And you'll see the language in position statement S2 reflects those definitions of those 3, as well as a broader sense, the conversation around the tenets of AQuESTT, which we're going to get into on this next slide. So you may have seen this before. You may have helped design it originally. I see some folks from our original AQuESTT task force on this call with us today, and that's just really cool. And I hope that those folks have seen the evolution of the system over time, create something better than what was even originally designed. So our AQuESTT system is a system of accountability and support. And I thought it was really smart that our board set out this vision for the structure, the things, the tenets that do need to be in place for our schools to succeed. We're going to go through each of these a little bit further, and Shirley's going to introduce a tool that may also be supportive in your conversations as school teams around the system of support and a common language.
Yeah, thanks for setting that up, Lane. The other piece around AQuEST is that aside from it being an accountability system, right? Like Lane has been talking about, what does it mean to actually describe what are the actions, what are the activities, what are the skills, what are the dispositions that all our schools should have in place so that each child can have a quality educational experience every day. So the board was attempting, and I would say we continue to attempt to do this every day throughout our work, right? To lay out what that is by the use of the tenants and the domains. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to dig deep into the first domain, which is leadership. While leadership had always been a domain in the AQuEST framework, it was never really like elevated. It was just there. It was like, we know we need it and we need it across all of them. But we wanted to be really specific about calling it out and actually putting words to what it means for having strong leaders, and leaders being not just a principal or superintendent, but our teacher leaders, right? Student leaders, our board, our community. So making sure that we were really intentional about elevating this here. And with the leadership domain not having any tenants, there were three areas of focus that stemmed out of the original group here. And it was instructional leadership, community and relationship builder, and improvement and resource management leader. And the link that Lane has put in the chat is actually to our comprehensive needs assessment. While the needs assessment originally started as a mechanism that was to fulfill a requirement for our comprehensive support and improvement schools, it was also an opportunity for the NDE to create a statewide language around what it would mean for any school to complete this needs assessment and use this tool as a way to assess where schools are in relation to each tenant and domain. So it'll force a copy, which means that you each now will have a copy of the needs assessment. While we do have a web interactive platform, it will be made available for people who would like to use it in a couple of weeks, hopefully by the end of the month. So more information will be forthcoming on that. But what we'd like for you to do now really quickly is take 2 minutes, right? I mean, we're not going to give you a lot of time here as this is an introduction to the sessions, but take a couple of minutes to review the leadership domain and these three areas of focus. And what are some words or phrases that resonate with you in this domain? And feel free to put them into the chat, and then we'll do a quick little call out like Lane did before. Thanks for kicking off there, Sarah. Yes, educational equity. It's definitely one of the ones that stuck out for me too. What are some other words or phrases? Yes, continuous improvement. Yes. What kids need at the right time, the right moment. Take a couple of more. Yes, I love the mindset, the vision, definitely meaningful connections and access, right? Exploring passions. Yes, thank you. So essentially what we want to do, right, is to be able to say, if we think of AQuEST as just as our accountability system, we are missing out on the robustness, if that's even a word. It's not, but I'll take it. I'm going with it. The robust opportunities of what it actually means to operationalize these domains and tenants. So that's our attempt here to do that. Moving on to the success, access, and support domain. The three tenants that support this domain: educational opportunities and access, transitions, positive partnerships, relationships, and success. And thank you, Jonathan. See, this is why I love this crowd. Thank you, supporting me. Love it. What we put out here on the slide, you'll see are the areas of focus. So these are all the things that then support the tenants, which support the domains, right? Because still, even in hearing educational opportunities and access, what does that actually mean to provide that on a regular ongoing basis for each child? And we're actually talking about ensuring technology infrastructure, digital learning, ensuring that we have student support services, that we have a school culture and climate that allows for these things to happen on an ongoing basis. So take a couple of minutes to just scroll through those tenants and this specific domain, and what are some words and phrases that are sticking out to you and resonating with you?
As you're putting your thoughts in the chat and as you're reviewing that comprehensive needs assessment for the specific pieces that may prompt some more thinking, I do want to point out student attendance. Student attendance was intentionally placed by folks in our thought partnership groups in the positive partnerships, relationships, and success. Commissioners shared at administrator days not too long ago that 77,000 children were chronically absent this last year. And so we are thinking about approaching this through positive partnerships, relationships, and success. And so I wanted to call that one out specifically. I love the idea of relevancy. Thank you for sharing that in here. And then culturally inclusive. Yes, thinking about the specific needs that each of our students may have based on who they are and the backgrounds from which they come. Keep those coming. A couple more. There we go. Great. Yes, love it. Each student. Yeah, you'll hopefully see a common theme of each student, every student, all students throughout. Absolutely. Thanks for that reflection on that as well. So as we move then to the final domain, which is success, teaching, learning, and serving, there are three tenets here, two of which underwent a specific language change in the 2019 revision. So the three tenets here are educator effectiveness, student achievement and growth, formerly assessment, and post-secondary career and civic readiness, formerly college career and civic readiness. I want to just spend a second on the name changes there, because I do think that they are important. The idea of student achievement and growth, I think, is now being reflected in our NSCAS growth system. And that was because the state board said it's about more than assessment and more than just proficiency. It's about student achievement measured in many ways and growth measured in many ways. The name change from college to post-secondary is also important, because we know that there is a need in our economy and in our world right now to have some sort of post-secondary, which may not be a four-year college. It may be a credential or a certificate of economic value. In fact, one more quick thing on this. The Nebraska legislature set a goal of 70% of our people, 25 to 34, to have some sort of post-secondary credential, diploma, certificate of economic value by 2030. We're about in the mid 40s, high 40s, and so we have a ways to go. And so this post-secondary career and civic readiness tenet, I think, is going to be getting a lot of attention, and the resources there are going to be important as well. So as we pause then on this page, you'll see the areas of focus that are reflected in the needs assessment across the three tenets in this large domain. Let's give you just a few minutes to reflect and then call out anything that is catching your attention here in the chat. Great. Thanks for what we're seeing in the chat here. Use of multiple sources to measure student growth, balanced assessment system, and the similar like cross-cutting nature into MTSS, calling out specifically standards, and then the focus on each student and what they need. Culture of success. I love that you caught that as well. Fantastic. And life pursuits. Yeah, interesting. We got some pushback on that term, life pursuits, because what does that really mean? But I think that calls to the civic readiness, and that we want our students to be happy, and we want them to be productive and enjoy their life as well as contributing to our country. Thank you. Great. So let's just sort of tie a bow around the AQuESTT tenets, right? As Shirley mentioned, this is sort of the common language that we can all call upon as we're working on continuous improvement, as we're working in school improvement. We'll talk about the differences between those two. But as we start this school year, I mean, it's here, it's upon us. I want to spend a little bit of time having you reflect in the chat box. Which of the tenets do you think your school or district really embodies? Like, when you say our school district, you think transitions or you think educator effectiveness. Which one is really you? And then which one do you think you could focus on this year? Which one do you think you could improve upon or make an area of improvement? And then what questions do you still have about the AQuESTT tenets? So we're going to pause here, just give a few moments for you to focus on one of these questions and pop it into the chat. Yes, thanks for the first contribution here. Focusing more on transitions, intentionally integrating that into the action plan for this school year, thinking about grade to grade and level to level. Yes, really appreciate that call out. Yep, fantastic. Focusing on educator effectiveness and supports, and also focused on achievement as well as leadership and transitions. Great to hear that. Thank you. Let's take a couple more. I have to say I live vicariously through the tweets I see of these back to school activities, the rich professional learning, the smiles on teachers' faces as they get ready for this school year. So I've also seen some of these themes come out in those tweets. So thanks for tweeting. Let's take a couple more. Yeah, thanks for sharing this slightly different perspective from an ESU perspective, really focusing on educator effectiveness. Fantastic. Yeah, it's very similar. Another ESU member saying focusing on educator effectiveness. Great. And then the positive partnerships, thinking of that from an NDE perspective, we have some NDE participants on here and quite a few new NDE staff. So thinking about those partnerships, relationships, and success. Thanks for calling that out. Yeah, fantastic, you all. Let's keep those reflections going if you'd like in the chat. We're happy to think about that further with you all, and definitely love to continue the conversation even offline. So Shirley mentioned this, right? We have focused mostly on this framework of support in this first 26 minutes of our conversation. We're focusing on the what do you do after you find out a classification, or what do you do as we improve, focus on school improvement, etc. But there's also this other part, this other half, which is around classification and our designations, which are signals to us on how and what specifically we might need to improve. Now, I get asked the question quite a bit, why do we even need an accountability system? And there's several reasons. The first of which is that it's required. It's a state and a federal mandate. And we'll talk just a little bit about those two mandates, like where does it actually come from, so that you can see those and that we're not just making it up, right? There are truly like expectations from the state legislature and expectations from the US Department of Ed and Congress about what accountability should be. Apart from that, right, set aside that we have to, we also get to set standards for all of our schools to ensure that our students are learning at about the equal level and making sure that the same expectations are had, so that we know and that the states around us and that our country knows that a Nebraska diploma actually means something. We also spend quite a bit of funds on our education system in this state. So we want to make sure that we're responsibly using those taxpayer funds, and that we're also able to focus dollars on improvement, right? Not only within our districts, we're able to say, actually, we need to put more resources to this elementary school that is struggling, but also as a state and as ESU partners as well. Like, we know this school may need more support, so we're going to focus our funds for improvement, or our efforts for that improvement. Our accountability system, especially with our targeted support and improvement and additional targeted support and improvement designations, which we'll talk about in a second, expose achievement gaps that have been historic and that are persistent, and help us then to focus our attentions once again on closing those achievement gaps that are often the result of opportunity gaps. And then, as we've spoken about now for 28 minutes, they create a framework. Our system creates a framework for improvement. So let's talk just a little bit about the actual laws that govern accountability. There are two. Well, there's several actually, but these two specifically. One comes from the state legislature, which I just shared there, which outlines the system of accountability and shares really the responsibility of the state board in developing a system of accountability. Shirley and I will be sharing with our state board sort of a similar conversation around this intro to AQuESTT, and then the what next with AQuESTT and accountability for this year at our September board meeting. And we want to make sure that they also see their role here in the development of these systems. From the federal level, we have the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was an amendment to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, or ESEA. So ESSA replaced ESEA. I know there's so many acronyms here as well. But both of these laws sort of in tandem dictate to the district, to the state education agencies like NDE, how to develop these accountability systems. And, you know, as somebody said in the conversation around the timeline, we truly have been responsive and tried to make it our own, a Nebraska-ized version of what this accountability should look like. Shirley, anything to add on that?
Well, the only thing I would add, and these are things that maybe aren't visible here, but also play a large role in accountability, is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, right? So how important it is for our students with disabilities to also ensure that they are given access and provided opportunities to demonstrate mastery across contents. And that's also another law that governs our accountability. And I would say, while not in federal law as well, but we do have state law around Rule 15 for the education of our English learners. So there's multiple pieces that we have to continue to ensure we have front and center when we're also talking about maybe not just big A accountability, like I know Lane talks about a lot of times, like what's the thing that's reported on and, you know, used to classify a school or say that a school is excellent, great, good, and needs improvement, but also things that inform then improvement practices and that inform, you know, the way that we engage with different communities. So I just wanted to add that little tidbit there. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks. Great point. And if you're intrigued by the federal accountability requirements, our next session this afternoon will really dive in deeply to what that looks like. So in an effort to create some coherence, the NDE, at the request of stakeholders, intentionally tried to bring these systems together, the federal requirements and the state requirements, as closely as we could into a coherent system under the umbrella of AQuESTT. So we want to share a little bit about the accountability system, right? We're sort of making this switch into a discussion about accountability. This slide should look familiar to some who have seen these present about accountability in the past. But accountability starts with the indicators. It starts with what are we trying to measure that gets us to the outcomes that we really hope for. So an indicator is just a measure of student achievement or an element perceived to influence those gains. Hopefully, the goal is that this data, this information, provides parents and communities a rich picture of school performance. So in our system for this fall, we have a few different ways that we are looking at that picture of a school. It's a snapshot in time, right? And it's one piece of data, but it does provide consistent information about schools in our state. The first indicator is status. Status is all about proficiency. Is a student proficient on ELA, English Language Arts, and math? We look at grades 3 through 8 using NSCAS and NSCAS growth, and then an ACT for our third-year cohort, as well as the alternate assessment. Did our students meet that proficiency for English Language Arts and math? We'll show you how to find that information in our third session, which is tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And share out some resources that really help you track those that status of your students. As our tenet, student achievement and growth implies, we also deeply value progress, student progress towards proficiency. And we have two indicators that are included in our system around student progress. We have growth, which is this child's year-to-year, year-over-year growth across NSCAS growth. And then we have the reduction in non-proficiency, which is about your school as a whole and seeing those non-proficient numbers go down. Graduation rate at the high school level is super important. We know Nebraska has a very high graduation rate, one of the highest in the nation. We're proud of that. I also want to show that and mention that we have and include a 7-year graduation rate in our accountability system. The Nebraska Constitution guarantees education for students, a public education for students until age 21. And so we see this 7-year graduation rate as a way to ensure that we're sticking with students and that we're also meeting the needs of students with disabilities and English learners throughout their time, and then graduating there as well. We have almost 25,000-ish English learners, and know that there are specific needs around the learning of English as a language. So we use the ELPA 21 assessment, which measures a student's ability to read, write, speak, and listen in the English language. So we are, in this indicator, looking at progress toward English language proficiency, looking at a student's first time that they enter and take the ELPA 21, setting out a trajectory for those students, and then ultimately seeing each year, did those students, and then did your cohort of English learners in your school as a whole make progress? Again, I'm sort of giving you like this really high level overview of each of these indicators. Tomorrow, when we talk about business rules, we'll get in the weeds a little bit further on each of these. Our final indicator is chronic absenteeism, which has changed just a little bit, even from what is on this screen. Normally, we look at a reduction towards a goal in chronic absenteeism. So we're saying, here's where your chronic absence was, here's where we think you should be. Did you meet that goals throughout each of the years? This year, we're looking at a snapshot of chronic absenteeism. Once again, 77,000 students were chronically absent in this last school year. And so we know that this needs to be a topic of our attention and an area of focus for us over this next year. So those indicators sort of are the underpinning for both our state, which is what you're seeing here, state classifications, and then also the designations, which will be on the next slide. So I want to just talk a little bit about classifications and designations first. So with classifications, this is that excellent, great, good, and needs support to improve, or what was formerly known as needs improvement. And while this chart is slightly confusing, perhaps, it does have a purpose. The reason that our system uses a series of zeros or negative ones or plus ones, also known as bumps up and down, is because our stakeholders from the very beginning of accountability said we do not want to be able to rank our schools. So I'll say that again. AQuEST, we cannot rank our schools from 1,001 to number one, right? And I actually really appreciate that part of our system, because there are a lot of weird things that happen at the top and a lot of weird things that happen at the bottom there in our classifications. And we don't want that competition. We want growth and we want achievement and individual focus. So what happens with classifications is we start with status. We say, how are your students performing as a whole on these NSCAS assessments or the ACT at the high school level? A 4 correlates with that excellent, 3 is great, 2 good, and 1 is needs support to improve. So that's the start. Every school starts with status. We then take a series of steps through each of these next tenets. So at the high school level, we look at graduation rates and extended graduation rates. And if we're seeing grad rates go down, for example, then a school may, based on whatever the cutoff is, lose a point and go down a level, right? And then you can see sort of the steps throughout. I will go into much more detail tomorrow in our conversation about business roles. But each of these indicators comes together under a tenet to provide either a +1, staying the same, so no added up or down bump, and then also to see that -1, where if we're seeing numbers go in the wrong direction, that also needs to be reflected in accountability. Shirley, I think I'll turn it to you to talk just a little bit about the ESSA accountability indicator.
Absolutely. So like you heard Lane mention, with ESSA, there are some specific requirements that as a state, every state, right, has to ensure they meet. And one of those is that we are required to meaningfully differentiate schools based on different indicators. So they provide us, as you see in the chart below, what the indicator should be about. So they have academic achievement, progress, English language proficiency, graduation rate, and school quality or student success. And what we've done, instead of creating a whole new set of indicators that would meet those requirements, we've taken the indicators we already use and have basically just aligned them to that specific requirement. And the piece around meaningfully differentiate is that it's important for us as a state to be able to say, well, here is a school, right, that is performing at a particular level for a particular student group, and here is a school that maybe isn't necessarily meeting that mark. So what we've done, since we are unable to rank schools, is created a filter system to be able to say, if these are all the possible schools that could be eligible because they meet a particular requirement, i.e. they have a certain number of students in a particular student group, then how do we actually get to, well, this school actually needs some type of additional support. So what we've done here is we've updated our graphic a little bit. You probably have seen the blue filter that starts from a big triangle down to like a fine point. And what we wanted to illustrate is that through each stage, right, some schools filter through and some schools don't. Right. So we start, for example, this is the example of what it would look like for a comprehensive support and improvement school. In order to enter the filter, you have to at least be a Title I school. Right. So we start there and then we go through a series of questions that you'll see in our second session if you join us later today, what those things are like. But we wanted to just give you a visual representation of how, as we go throughout the filter, we see that some schools make it through and then end up as schools that are identified for support, and then some don't, based on the lower portion here where you see what's the comparison point, right? Because that's ultimately the other piece that we want to make sure we're clear about, is that we're not just saying, okay, we shook them out of a hat and these are the schools that are identified. There is actual business rules, right? So join us tomorrow at 9 a.m. To learn more about that. But essentially, we want to just give you a visual representation of what that process looks like. And this is just for the CSI schools, but this is similar for TSI and ATSI. Did I miss anything, Lane? No? All right, then I'll move us. Oh, I knew I said, okay.
You didn't miss anything. I just want to add. So you'll notice they're the exact same indicators. They're just rearranged in different ways. So again, that is the intent, was to try to create some coherence among these systems and to be able to focus on that. Shirley, if you can go back one slide, I do want to just make one thing, call out one thing specifically, which is you may see these lines through specific indicators. Then you probably saw it on the previous slide as well. So what you're seeing in the table is what was before this pandemic. And we knew we had to make some adjustments. We'll talk about those adjustments, but I just wanted to make it clear that those lines are intentional because we wanted to show what was changing between what was in 2018-19 and what is for now. So as we go forward, it's like, well, what does this all matter? Like, what's the point of doing classifications and designations? And it really comes down to this graphic that we want to make sure that you also see. Every year, schools will get classified. That was a recent change from the legislature. It used to be every 3 years. You'll see that reflected in the timeline. But our classifications, that excellent, great, good, and need support to improve, will occur every year. And have occurred, right, every year except for these pandemic years, with some changes, right? In addition, we have these designations, which are around the outside, which is all about the different supports. And I'll let Shirley talk about those.
Yes. So first we start with the identification of understanding where schools have been identified, targeted and additional targeted support. This is specific to underperforming student groups. And in a couple of slides, we'll talk about what those student groups are and where those schools are located. For our CSI schools, we have comprehensive support and improvement, again, reserved specifically for Title I schools. And this is the lowest 5% of those schools. Any public school that has a graduation rate under 67% is immediately flagged for this level of support as CSI. And then if a school that has had a student group that has been underperforming, that's identified as ATSI, if after 3 years they do not exit, they also move up to comprehensive support and improvement schools. So that one has a little bit of a little more different levers to be pulled before you are identified there. And then our priority schools are among the lowest performing schools in our state and have demonstrated the greatest need to implement and sustain school improvement efforts. And we have a process of identifying those schools that follow a similar filter-like process. So this is overall, like, and you see some numbers, 363 schools that were TSI or ATSI, 27 schools that are CSI, and currently 3 schools that are priority schools. All this to say that this is all meant to be a level of support. In no instance are any of us from the NDE coming into a school and saying these things must happen, especially, right, if we're not in the school every day and we're not the school leader or superintendent, right? It is all about working alongside schools and districts to build their own capacity to sustain improvement efforts over time so that they are supporting their students, continuing to support their students, excuse me. So one distinction I want to make clear here is the change in our language between continuous improvement and school improvement. Often I hear them used interchangeably, and I have to ask myself, are we talking about a process that everyone is engaged in every year over a period of time that, you know, is really focused on self-reflection, adaptation, growth, you know, there's no predetermined point. You do this it's part of your process, right? It's part of the way you do business in your school or in your district, and that's continuous improvement. I would say every school, public and non-public, engages in that process. Agencies, ESUs, NDE, right? We engage in that process. School improvement, I have been really focused on this, making a distinction around it being something that's reserved. I don't know if I want to say reserved, but it's focused on schools that are underperforming, and is focused on schools that have dramatic interventions or comprehensive interventions. Typically, they're focused on leadership, culture, instructional transformation, and teacher and leader development. And if you heard that, right, you didn't hear me say, things around, I mean, it could be, but you didn't hear me say things specifically around like PLC structure, or hear maybe anything specifically around, like transportation. I mean, those are things that are still have to happen and still need to get done. But the focus of the school improvement component here is around ensuring that what's happening in the classroom between a teacher, a student, and the content they are learning is tight. And it is focused on strengthening that core one instruction, and also ensuring that tiers of support are also there for whatever else might be needed based on student need. That may sound like, wait, I do that also in continuous improvement. Yes, as you should be. But school improvement is also then dependent on the type of support that's provided, i.e. NDE and ESUs might be providing joint PL on a consistent basis, and those schools are then attending those sessions. Or as a priority school, you have an intervention team that's coming into the school on a regular basis, maybe every month, maybe every 4 to 6 weeks, and supporting with the implementation of that work. Continuous improvement, we're not maybe necessarily supporting the implementation of that work. You're doing that on your own with your own district and school capacity. So hopefully that helps to discern the difference that we're making between these two terms, and how then in this next graphic, you see how it intensifies based on your identification. So we've attempted to take a tiered approach to supporting our schools, in how the better we understand what support the schools need, the more we can coordinate, differentiate, and intensify that support. So for example, every school receives a classification, not every school will receive a designation, right? So, and as you move, dependent on that designation is the more intense or differentiated that support might be. So for example, targeted and additional targeted support and improvement schools might not have regular visits from me or my team, right? Maybe they'll see me once a year, and that's okay, right? But our CSI and priority schools might see me more frequently. All examples, right? Nothing is like set in stone. That just wanted to provide those examples for you. So what we see here then related to federal accountability, on this chart, you see comprehensive support and improvement schools. We've already identified how those schools are designated. The type of support that comes with this work here is engaging in a comprehensive needs assessment. And it isn't just here's the tool, engage with it. It's more around what are the conversations a school leader and their school leadership team is having related to those tenets of AQuESTT, and the extent to which those things exist regularly and consistently for every child in every classroom. Then we engage in some root cause analysis, selection of evidence-based practices, drafting of goals that the school will focus on, that's connected to the continuous improvement plan. And what I would say is also important here is that there's funding that comes attached to this specific designation. When a school is identified, they're engaged in that process for X number of years, and then we redesignate CSI schools every 3 years. We're going to talk about some adjustments that have been made as a result of U.S. Department of Ed waiver we received because of the impacts of federal accountability, but we'll get to that in a couple of slides. Lane, did you want to say something there?
You bet. I just want to call out the great conversation or great question in the chat, which asks, in theory, could you have a non-Title I school with greater needs in CSI and priority? I would say for sure the Title I status is the law, right? So that's why we're really focusing in and keying in on Title I. I do think there are examples of schools, specifically at the high school level, because we have so few Title I high schools, that there may be instances where there are schools that have greater need that aren't getting identified for comprehensive support and improvement. And that's why we have sort of these two systems, right? Because ideally, we're going to be looking at the same indicators that would help us see, well, this high school, for example, may not have been CSI, but they're showing up on needs improvement. When we look at their student groups, we're seeing that their student groups are having challenges or have additional needs, et cetera. So Shirley, do you have anything to add to that?
No, and I'm also sorry I was messing around in the chat. All right. No, but it sounded great. Okay. Yes, there will be access to these slides. We just wanted to make sure you all were with us on the slides, but we will make sure we get those slides to you, and Lane will make that happen. I'm going to keep us moving because I'm seeing the time. Okay. For TSI and ATSI, the distinction made here is that it is any public school that that meets the N size for that student group. Our N size currently is 10 students, and the student groups will be talking about them in the subsequent slides here. But what I wanted to address here is that the requirements here are slightly different than the requirements for priority and CSI schools, in that this is a district-led improvement effort, and we want to make sure that our schools and districts understand that you aren't necessarily submitting anything to the NDE, but it's more about the extent to which the district is supporting the school that has been identified. And that district may receive support from the NDE and their ESU, but there isn't necessarily that requirement of I have to submit a plan. I'm receiving X number of funds, therefore I have to do all these other things. However, and this is a big however, if a school is identified as ATSI for any student group, right? ATSI for any student group, while you don't have to submit a plan, and we urge you to use a current existing structure, i.e. a continuous improvement plan, your targeted improvement plan that's specific for students with disabilities. If you have a Title I plan, a consolidated ESSA plan, whatever plan you're using that's guiding your work, we have to be certain that that plan was developed with multiple stakeholders in your community, that that plan was informed by all the accountability indicators, i.e. the things that Lane mentioned a few slides ago, and that it is also inclusive of a resource allocation review. A resource allocation review is the extent to which a school has determined whether or not there are resource inequities that exist in their school that are related to the time, the talent, or the treasure, right? So time meaning scheduling the hours or minutes of instruction that a student has access to or doesn't have access to, talent, staffing, either needs or staffing placements, based on a variety of pieces, right? It could be evaluation, it could be professional learning, like it could be, paraprofessional distribution. And then treasure is around funds, right? So the extent to which a school or a district through allocation to schools, right, has provided sufficient funds for, Title II around professional learning, or, Title I related to ensuring they have the appropriate materials or resources to support student learning. So we will provide more information on tomorrow's afternoon session around the resource allocation review, and then we'll have subsequent information shared around that. But the ATSI those distinctions are important, because after 3 years, like I said before, if those schools do not exit, they become CSI schools. So we just want to continue to bring attention to that, because there's just a lot of information there. We'll make sure to get our FAQs out and make sure we provide the resources so you all can call upon those and any other supports that you may need. Lane, did you want to say anything? Sorry, I don't know if I saw you. No? Okay. So really quickly, the student groups, again, you may have seen a couple of these slides already, but we have 7 racial and ethnic groups. And we have economic disadvantage, English learners, and students with disabilities as the 10 groups coming from the SLA that we talked about earlier, that we track for targeted and additional targeted support and improvement. And then we also want to make sure we demystify where these students are and where these schools are that are identified. The green dots are TSI, the orange looking dots are ATSI, and you might not be able to see many of them because they're all kind of bunched up in different places. But the point is that we have a large distribution of these schools across our state, right? They're not necessarily just concentrated in one area or one community. And I want to just draw your attention to the number of schools that are identified based off of the student group performance. So students with disabilities was our highest identification student group at 274 schools that were identified for that student group specifically. Then we have students that are economic disadvantaged at second, third, English learners, and then you see then the breakdown for racial and ethnic groups. Now, I want to say it's possible that you might be in a school that has multiple identifications, right? Because we also know that students exist in intersections. So a student could be a student with disability and also be a white student and also be a student that's experiencing poverty. But for the extent of this designation, we take each individual student group as individual groups. And then we share all this information with schools based on their designation. Any point would you like to add, Lane? Yes.
Just very quickly, just for clarity's sake, so this is the designations for TSI and ATSI that were made in 2019. And so I just wanted to make sure that you all see this is our current cohort, and we're going to talk a little bit about those cohorts as well. Yeah, great. So we hope that that's sort of an intro a little bit to the to what has been and what will be in this classification and designation for the fall. We really want to zoom in now specifically on fall, this upcoming fall right now, right? So there was a question in the chat about when we could expect these classifications and designations. We're still working out the exact timeline, and we have all of the data necessary. We have the graduation rates, we have the attendance data, we have the NSCAS data, with the exception of science, which had their cut scores set last Friday by the state board. So we have all of the data, and now it's a matter of us at NDE cleaning that data, processing that data, using those business rules that we'll talk about to get that out. But I will say it will be much sooner, and we're anticipating early fall, which I know is not super specific, but what I can tell you right now. So what do we know, and what are our kind of key talking points about fall of 2022? Well, we know we have to do this, right? And so we're leading with that by saying, like, we know this may not be the top focus for you or your students or for your school or your teachers, but we're doing it, and we have to do it based on the flexibilities that we've gotten from our federal partners. We also know that we can't just like snap back to normal. There's no way for us to get to the same sort of stability that we had with our assessments. We had exceptional amounts of chronic absenteeism. We know that isn't normal. So we want to think about this as a dimmer switch. How do we use this year as a transition into a more stable system for next year in the fall of 23? We also know, as I said, that there are indicators that have changed. It's not a normal accountability year. We've had a change in our assessment system. We removed the evidence-based analysis from our accountability system, and chronic absence and other school quality measures have changed as well. So all of this to say that, like, what we get is going to be a snapshot in time, showing us how our schools performed and where we really need to focus over time. And then I also just want to name, like, we hear you that there have been a lot of changes in accountability, and we know that we have to get to a place where our system stays stable. So that's sort of what we're thinking about from more of a philosophical standpoint. And then as we look to sort of the themes, just to reiterate and say it in a different way, different year necessitates different accountability. So we know that this will be a transition year. The commissioner also talked about like rebaselining and resetting this idea of a new normal, setting out those goals. What can we tell from our 21-22 data? And where do we want to focus? Where do we need to focus our attention on specific student groups? What do we want to be true for our students, our schools, our teachers, our communities in 1, 3, and 5 years? So using this opportunity, the snapshot in time, to really look forward. And then we also want to do this every time and every year that we do classifications and designations. But specifically, we know that specific student groups were impacted more than some others. We've all been in the same storm, but we haven't been in the same boat. And so we want to use this accountability year, this snapshot, to understand which schools need additional support, need a surge of resources. So that's sort of our philosophy as we're going into this accountability season. And we'll be, as Shirley mentioned, kind of pulling out and teasing out these talking points, having FAQ ready, having talking points ready, so that you can use those and access those and then adapt those as needed for your schools. So just a couple of things. We did accept the U.S. Department of Ed's offer for flexibility in our accountability for this year. Otherwise, we would have been held to our ESSA plan. We'll talk again much more in depth around this and what was changing, but we did have this approved in April, and I'll share this in the chat. Our approval letter that was from the U.S. Department of Ed, ours sailed through, which was really nice because some schools or some states, excuse me, are still working on theirs. And so we were encouraged that our plans were accepted. And now what we're doing is modeling these indicators, taking the data that we had, cleaning it up, trying to see what the impact would be if we move things just slightly, and then what that's going to ultimately mean for how many schools that we have. You'll see this last bullet here around communication. Shirley and I have been trying to say this to as many people in as many different ways, sharing these messages out as we go. And then I'll let you talk, Shirley, a little bit about this next slide around the cohorts.
Yeah, so when we talked about the identification and the different levels of designations that we have in completing the waiver or the addendum, excuse me, that Lane mentioned, we needed to be as forward thinking or look out as far as possible to understand how the decisions that we make for this upcoming year, while it being a transition year, have implications for subsequent years. So we had to look out as far as 26, 27, which is why you see all of this here. We also wanted to provide just a quick historical context about the fact that we only started designating schools in 2018, 2019. So I just want to make that distinction as well. And then you see 2019-20 not being taken into account because of the flexibilities that were provided by the U.S. Department of Education then. And now here we are in the middle, which is 22-23, that we're calling a transition year. This means that CSI schools that are currently identified or were part of the original cohort have an opportunity to exit this year. If those schools do not exit, they enter what's a more vigorous option. And we'll talk about that in a subsequent slide here. We also are going to identify new CSI schools. And this is an opportunity for those schools to engage in the process of receiving funds and doing needs assessment and action planning. What you see in the pink underneath where I said CSI is that prior to this year, those schools would have been locked into that designation for 3 years. What we've done here in order for us to all get back on track is we've added a 4th year, but allowed schools to exit at any point throughout those 4 years. So it's possible that a school can exit next year and not be a CSI school anymore. It's possible they remain and they stay another year, but no additional consequence, so to speak, or no additional next step would have to be taken because they're within that time frame of 4 years. If you step down or come down with me to the ATSI row, you see that there are 116 schools that were identified as ATSI. These schools will remain an additional year because according to our plan, that was always the original intention. They will, however, have an opportunity to exit next year. This will be a huge focus for us this school year, these 116 schools, because if those schools do not exit, the following year, they become CSI schools. We want to make sure that we provide as much support and articulation related to what their data currently says, right? Although they were identified in 2019, we want to make sure that those schools, regardless of whoever their students are this upcoming year, right? We want to make sure they're set up for success to move forward and exit the following school year. We're also identifying a new set of ATSI schools this year. These two designations kind of go hand in hand because of the pieces that happen if a school does not exit, right? So we want to make sure that we keep them together and that they understand that these schools that are identified also understand that they have a 4-year trajectory but can exit at any time, just like the CSI schools that are identified this year. So we wanted to keep them parallel and similar and make sure that everything's clear and that we all get back on track on 2016, 2017. It's also possible that, you know, the SLA gets rewritten, something happens and all this changes. I mean, we're working from the confines of what we know today and what we know this moment in time when we created this. And that's where we are right now. Any thoughts, Lane, that I may have missed or you want to add? No? Great. Okay. So what does this mean in the long term? Because you've heard us say now a couple of times, transition year. So we do need, in fact, to get through this upcoming school year, so to speak, get through, right? But make sure that we provide supports and also clear about where we're going for this upcoming school year, but the implications of what it means for subsequent school years. Lane mentioned we have an ESSA plan, which essentially governs the work that we do related to assessment, accountability, reporting, and all the other federal laws tied to education. And it means that we're going to have to do an amendment to our plan because now we are adjusting for our current context. And we have been working with the Center for Assessment, which is a national nonprofit organization that provides support to other state agencies related to assessment and accountability. And they have been helping us to also envision what our accountability system ought to be by, bringing multiple stakeholders together. So we've had a small advisory group representative of different sizes and regions of our state, in order to make recommendations about our accountability system. So that in tandem with the ESSA plan amendment all coming together is essentially where we're going with this. And we hope to implement in our new ESSA plan in the upcoming school year. So Lane, I'll transition it to you if you want to add anything and then take us on to the next slide.
So once we get the sort of final report from the Center for Assessment, it's been about 1.5 years of engaging with a smaller group that we've called the AQuESTT Advisory Group. We're going to be taking those recommendations, taking that sort of capstone project to all of these different groups for feedback, the AAA, the TAC, Committee of Practitioners, et cetera. So we're looking forward to receiving that and sort of then having this Center for Assessment, truly national leaders in this work, help us make that transition. The only other thing, so that was sort of like from the federal level, the only other change that we wanted to signal to you is what was passed in 2021, LB 154, which is all about discipline. So I'm sharing here the actual bill that is LB 154. I talk a lot about the spirit of the law with bills. And what I mean by that is like what the introducer and what folks were trying to do. We do have disparate discipline rates in our state. We have disparate discipline based on race and ethnicity, based on disability, and based on economic status and English learners as well. So all of those groups that were included. So what this bill does essentially is requires the NDE to publicly report and include discipline in the accountability system. We already publicly report it. It's just a few clicks away on our Nebraska education profile page. But we're going to be bringing it more to the forefront to try to make sure that folks know and see that we're implementing this law with fidelity. The inclusion and accountability, we're still working that out. I want feedback on that and what that could include. It does say the accountability system, so there's ways that we can think about how that might be included in the system. I want to make it very clear that you all are already providing us this discipline data. So there's no new data collection, nothing like that. But I just am naming this. We wanted to make sure that you all saw this because it's important for you to, especially this year, keep close tabs on your discipline rates, your tracking of data, et cetera, so that we have really accurate data once we come into the next year. So this year's data will be used in the system of accountability and will be publicly reported, again, as it already is. If you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to me. The other document that I wanted to share, and I did share, is what you see here, which is some guidance from the US Department of Ed about students with disabilities specifically, and student discipline for students with disabilities. So while these two are like unrelated, right? I do want to say they actually are quite related, right? They came out separately, and I think it's just really sort of a nice timeline here for us to see that. I did see a chat. Oh, the link did not work. It looked like. I will try to get that. Oh, thank you for putting that link in the chat, the correct link. Fantastic. Yeah, the bill also requires schools to identify a discipline data steward. So make sure that you're having somebody, probably whoever's doing your attendance data, et cetera, make sure that you have somebody that you are going to be designating as that person responsible for that. There's a question in the chat about already publicly displaying data. Yes, it is in the NEP, the Nebraska Education Profile, and it's sort of back behind the scenes at a district level on what is called the CRDC, the Civil Rights Data Collection page. And so that data is reported there. You'll see things like violent incidences, which are, again, data you provide to us, suspensions, in-school suspensions, out-of-school suspensions, et cetera. All of that data exists. We report it to the feds, and now the state legislature is saying that we need to report that a little bit better on our NEP page as well. So thanks for those questions and that clarity. Fantastic. So more about that to come, because we know that there's a lot that we need to still work out. I just wanted to name it early so that you all know that this school year's data will be used in that fashion. So you've heard Shirley and I hype up these sessions, and we really are excited for these conversations with you all. So you just experienced the intro to AQuESTT, a conversation about the 6 tenets, the 3 domains, as well as a high-level classification and designation overview. From 11 to 1 today, we will be having virtual office hours that will not be recorded. That will be an opportunity for you all to join, listen into what your colleagues may be asking, what questions they may have. It's super informal. Shirley and I will probably be eating lunch at that time, as well as just answering any questions that you all might have, walking through any data, et cetera. And then at 1 o'clock, we will be having a specific conversation about federal accountability. So you're going to hear some of the same information, but much more in depth. And we'll talk about specific changes. You'll see our new graphics for our filtering system, and we'll go quite a bit in depth. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., we'll also have a session on business rules. So this is going to be like pretty technical. I'm actually going to walk you through the business rules documents, those documents that show the mechanics of the accountability system. And then at 11 o'clock tomorrow is really Shirley's show, which is using this data and other data to inform improvement efforts. Shirley, what did I forget?
Nothing. Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. Sorry. Yeah, just the office hours. If you are having any questions about anything, you can join us there. try to be funny, but whatever. Just come hang out with us if you like as well. And I think that's it, Lane. So we thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for the questions, the comments. Please keep them coming. You all help us get better at what we do and make sure we provide you with the most up-to-date information. This recording, along with the PowerPoint, will be made available to our AQuEST page, and we'll make sure that those who have registered then get a follow-up link to access these resources. So we thank you all and hope to see you all soon. Take care, everyone.